What's up, everyone? Before we get to the show, remember to hit the like, subscribe, download, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you listen. This helps us bring you the amazing guests like we have today. So let's get to the show. On this episode, we have an IBJJF U.S. National and Open Champion, Rickson Gracie International Champion, Naga Advanced Champion, and former MMA Pro with a list of BJJ credentials that goes on and on. But what he is most known for is his company, Tour Protection Protective Service Operations. Tod Fox has taken his 12 years of U.S. Marine experience, along with his career in law enforcement, and spent the last 21 years protecting Fortune 500 CEOs, world-famous musicians on tour, and actors on film sets across the world. Listen as Tod discusses how jiu-jitsu has prepared him for his line of work and how the jiu-jitsu mindset can help you in all of life's challenges, both mentally and physically. He also discusses the logistics of protecting his clients through various situations, both at home and abroad. Tod also shares with us how to keep the average citizen safe in an increasingly dangerous world. Here's the RŌL Radio with third-degree black belt under Rodrigo Vaghi and author of the book Protection for and from Humanity, Tod Fox.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live. Why are you laughing?
Why am I laughing? I got the giggles because of you today. Real quick, before we get to why I have the giggles, though, the RŌLRadio.com, we changed up the competition, or the contest, I should say, to win the free Fuji gi. Go there, leave a question for a guest. We will read those questions on the air, and then out of those questions, we will randomly choose one that will win the free Fuji gi. And as you know, we give that away the first podcast of the month. We wipe the slate clean, so you have a higher percentage now instead of all the hundreds of entries.
Yeah, so drop your questions every month. But I'm actually surprised how many people already dropped their questions. So it keeps growing. I actually thought this would be a slow process to onboard this new thing that we are doing, but no. So take advantage of it. Drop the questions. This is your chance to ask the questions to the guest that we have on, right? So there is the engagement that we are creating. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Talk about overcoming obstacles, right?
Yeah.
Man, this episode almost didn't happen. I mean, we have Todd Fox in the house. Todd, how are you?
Good, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah. So, Gary, you want to tell the story?
Yeah, I'll tell the story.
Because I know you anxious to talk about my obstacles or my failures.
Just yours,
almost.
yeah. Todd came through, but yours, he forgot all his podcasting equipment today. But he did show up with a bag of cookies, so we know where his priorities are, right? So we got our oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, but we didn't have.
This is what I get.
This is what you get. Yeah. I can't take it out on you on the mats, so I have to do it here. This is the only place I can do it. So.
It's open. It's open platform.
Open season.
Almost didn't happen, but yet we are here. Todd, how are you doing? How is life going?
Not bad. As you know, I just we're running a course for some South American nationals this week, and we had some hangups at the airport, and so it was a little bit slow getting in here. But other than that and a computer failure, man, I'm doing good. How are things over there?
Oh, I mean, aside from me forgetting laptops and the major tool that I need to have a conversation with you, I mean, life is good.
Yeah,
listen, I got half of my neighborhood involved in this operation to make it here on time. I'm telling you, it's like you get this, you meet me here, blah 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 blah. Hey, everybody.
It all came together.
That's a great lesson, man. Something goes wrong and you have an option. You either quit or you try to find a way to make it work with what you have when you have it, and however you can with the tools or the connections or people or neighborhood or community. And you did the latter, which is awesome.
Well, and it is interesting, that you bring that up, because your experience from a professional perspective and then leaping that into jiu-jitsu, it is phenomenal. I mean, you've dealt with some one, interesting people in your life, but two, you serve them or work with them on a very, very specific purpose. Can you talk about that a little bit? What you do and how you do? Maybe some people don't know who you are. Quickly, like in that, don't talk as much as Gary does, but like just a little bit, okay?
Yeah, so my background is military, the Marine Corps, and law enforcement SWAT team, and the last 21 or 2 years in particular, I've been focused on protective services, right? So what you would call a bodyguard or any variant of that, executive protection, protective service operations. And 80% of our core demographic and client base is entertainment. So that means musicians who go out on tour. That means actors who are shooting films overseas. That's who we deal with. So that's the brunt of it. And then second to that, obviously, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. I'm a black belt and have been for like 14 years and competitive in jiu-jitsu and no-gi and MMA back in the day. And so that's our link up, I think.
What came first, jiu-jitsu or your professional career?
Well, the Marines came, I had done martial arts, and then the Marines kind of accelerated the type of martial arts that I was involved with. And then I ended up on recruiting duty in the Marines, and I ended up going next door to a jiu-jitsu school in the 95, 96 timeframe, and met a guy named Rodrigo Vaghi, who was one of Hickson's black belts. Mm-hmm. And so it was by luck that I was literally next door to a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school in the mid-90s. And had it not been for that, I'd still be doing bare knuckle karate and maybe some light boxing or something like that, but I wouldn't have everything that I have now.
It seems like there's this group of individuals back in the 90s who somehow, quote unquote here, got lucky being exposed to this jiu-jitsu way back in the day. I mean, you're talking about 95, 96, that jiu-jitsu is barely getting off the ground at that point, right? I mean, the UFC is a couple years in, jiu-jitsu is barely existent, right? And it's like there's this handful, everybody we talked to back from that generation or from that period of time, they all say, we got lucky to be there. And at that point, we didn't even know what we were dealing with. It was just a cool thing. And we kind of got into it. And now, every single one of you guys, have this strong message. This converts into your profession. This converts into your, not only your lifestyle, but there is a big service that you're trying to provide to general population. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on. I mean, you hit it on the money. I think jiu-jitsu transcends a lot of things, a lot of components, a lot of aspects of life. And I don't know as a jiu-jitsu guy that there's a better metaphor for life than jiu-jitsu. And, we touched on it just now. You face challenges, you face struggles, and jiu-jitsu basically conditions you to be prepared for the struggles. But then when you hit the struggles, not to quit and know that you can still win even when you're down and out. It's every role. Think about that. It's problem analysis solution, where you're faced with some adversity, maybe a bigger person, a stronger person, a more technical person, and you have to address that problem that's in front of you. And if you're rolling for 5 or 6 or 7 minutes in a round on average, even if you manage to conquer one problem, you're on to the next problem. And so it's like, 6, 7, 8, however many rolls you do, if you're doing like 6-minute rolls and you do 10 of them, you got 10 problems. And some are bigger problems, some are smaller problems, some are easy to manage and navigate, some are more difficult. And that's based on how you're addressing them, what your experience level is. It's based on how you see that problem and what solutions you have available to you. And I think for the most part, relative to what you're saying, guys that have been around it for a long time are conditioned by jiu-jitsu. They're conditioned to expect the hardship. They're conditioned to deal with it and then to thrive in that bit of chaos and that bit of uncertainty.
But it's so much easier to quit.
It is, but you know what? Guys that stick around, I'll tell you, in my case, when I came, I had been winning all kinds of stuff in the Marine Corps and fighting with bare knuckle karate. And when I came in, I got destroyed by like a 17-year-old kid who was 150 pounds. He just played with me, and then everybody else did. And my gut instinct initially was like, I'm so embarrassed, like that my manhood was taken away. You don't want to come back because you don't want to face that reality. But for the people that stick around, in particular past blue belt, you start to see they've found a way to manage that. They've found a way to deal with that adversity. They found a way to deal with the ups and downs. And it doesn't stop at black belt. You can be a 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever stripe black belt, and you're still going to have the problems. You're still going to have issues. There are still people that are going to present ideas that either you're not aware of, it's a new technique or a new concept, or just a a body type that's hard for you to deal with, or a mindset that's hard for you to deal with. And so it's ingrained in you. And as long as you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're training jiu-jitsu, that's part of who you are.
You mentioned blue belt. Why?
I mentioned blue belt.
I'm going to put you on a spot here.
Yeah, it's a weird deal where people achieve this level of blue belt, which is a great threshold, and particularly in my gym, it's a rite of passage because they do a brutal formal blue belt test that's just punishing. But across the country and even I think across the world, you see a lot of people quitting at blue belt. It's like they reached the pinnacle. Like, I got this thing. I've been working on this thing. I got it. I'm good. And you're not. You're just simply not. I'm not done at black belt, and in 10 years I won't be done. But for some reason we've created this threshold. Like, I need to get to this spot, and if I get to that spot, I'm good enough. And the truth is, for guys that've stuck around this long enough, they know you're never good enough. You really can't master jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and this is such an interesting, and I don't mean to deviate this conversation. Gary, jump in on this anytime because you are a judo guy. But this is I had this conversation with a judoka recently, and it's in judo. If you take judo as a sport, as an art, nothing really matters until, and even Travis Stevens talked about it, nothing really matters until you achieve a black belt. Like, once you get the black belt, then we can have a conversation. Okay, now you actually know the basics. Okay, let's get to work now. Versus in jiu-jitsu, I think that point is the blue belt, is that first major milestone. It's that first door that really opens. Prior to that is this kind of pat on the back, stripes, which all of it is great, but that blue is what separates the student from somebody who's just starting.
See, I think it's the purple, and I think that's why blue belts quit.
Okay.
Because they have an understanding. Things are coming to fruition. They're learning more movements than moves. We always talk about that, and concepts. But then they're still getting their ass kicked all the time. I speak from loads of experience on a daily basis. And
I think you guys are both actually right simultaneously. I think there is some level of basic respect. And I remember going to Japan for the first time 20-something years ago and seeing a room full of black belts. It was a judo school. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. But the reality is that's just the threshold for a real beginning, like where you have a foundational understanding and now you can start to play the game, right? And I think that's true with blue belt. But I also think, I agree with Gary that there's a thing with purple belt where it's almost like they know everything a black belt knows at that point, and it just comes down to the trickery, right? And so, jiu-jitsu, it's the science of jiu-jitsu, it's the art of jiu-jitsu. And when I say that, I mean science, like your arm only bends one way, right? And your neck, if you cut a certain percentage of blood off, you're going to pass out. That's science. But the art is how you get there, how you trick them, how you make them see it. And I think at purple belt is really another major threshold, but not for quitting. I don't see that as much for quitting, but for being equivalent to, on many levels, to a black belt. I see that a lot, and I see that in a lot of schools. Like, I know enough. I've been here just long enough to know pretty much what you know. I just can't trick you yet.
Yeah, I think Hickson has even said that. I remember I do some of the social media here, and we do quotes every once in a while, and Hickson has talked about that too, that when you are a purple belt, you have all the tools you need. You just can't apply it yet, And I like the way you say trickery. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, often instructors actually talked about that. The major difference between purple, brown, and black is the efficiency, timing, and really seeing it ahead of time, or being able to, what you just talked about, Todd, putting them in that position where you want them to be, right? And that's really, but the tools are all there, right? The question is, which tools do you use at this particular time to continue troubleshooting this and figuring things out, right? But so leaping back to the conversations, to your comment earlier, right? It's mostly all about troubleshooting, right? We find ourselves in these predicaments because that's essentially what they are, right? I'm passing your guard, you passing my guard, I'm defending, you attacking, you choking me, I'm escaping, whatever the case might be. We're continuously troubleshooting these things, right? And finding not only the tool that we need, but the right tool at the right time. And then when we get it, a new predicament comes up. Continuous troubleshooting.
Yeah, so what you're talking about and what I mentioned with problem analysis solution is essentially the scientific method. The only thing is we're physically dealing with the scientific method. And then, as you mentioned, our situation changes constantly, right? So we're dealing with one problem. And then as we are successful in dealing with that, we're presented with another problem. And in the process, we need to shift to, say, an offensive movement so that we take ourselves out of the loop. And that's one thing that we talk about a lot. And the military guys know that. We talk about Colonel Boyd's OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And essentially what it is a decision-making cycle. And that's constantly happening throughout jiu-jitsu. You might have a 6-minute roll and you might go through the OODA loop 1,000 times, because as you mentioned, I'm trying to, observe what's happening. I'm trying to orient myself or adjust my angles, my positioning, my pressure to the situation. I'm deciding what I'm going to do next, and then I'm acting. I'm actually implementing that, but I'm implementing it against stress. And the thing that my opponent does when he changes angles or positions or pressure, all of a sudden my equation changes, the problem changes, and now I need to introduce a different solution to that problem.
Yeah, and that, again, that's the interesting part about jiu-jitsu, that it continuous evolving. As you've been around the world, because you travel quite a bit, right? Is there a country that you haven't been to yet?
Yeah, there are plenty. So I've been to 148 countries, and I think there's like 230 some odd countries. And that changes frequently, because countries will be recognized and then they're not recognized, or it'll compartmentalize. And it's Yugoslavia one day, and now it's Bosnia and Croatia and Serbia, and so it's around 230. So I'm 148 into 230-ish.
Is that part of your goal in life, to visit as many as possible, or this is just coincidence?
I would love to visit every country on the planet. Given what's going on right now, I don't know how that's possible, but mine has been predominantly through work, right? Because I deal with, again, the music tours that go overseas, and then I deal with the films that shoot on location. And when you deal with celebrities, they have power, and they have money, and they have access to things. And that tends to create these opportunities for travel and going certain places that otherwise normal guys like us would never go. I'm not going to be on a yacht off the coast of Monaco if it wasn't for, client X or client Y.
So, without obviously mentioning any names here, but talk about a little bit about what the professional side of your life, right? I mean, it's how do you bleed that aspect of continuous troubleshooting to how you use this in your professional life? So maybe you're on assignment or a job, you do some of these professional things for celebrities or high profile individuals. What does your work look like?
So one of the things that you're asking about is kind of what my job looks like, and then you bring in celebrities, and those are two separate components, because my job is really to create a safe environment, a safe bubble, and then to make decisions that keep them in a safe, not safe spot or safe space, but keep them in a safer environment than if I hadn't made the decision. So, for example, before we go somewhere, we're doing a lot of research on a place, whether it's a country or a specific location within the country, and we'll make contacts in that place if we don't already have them, and they'll give us real-time information on the ground. And then we're going to start pulling up mapping and looking at where we're going and how we're going and routes, and we're going to pick vehicle types based on what's available in a given country or place. And we're going to start pulling together a plan, and we're going to know where everything's at. I'm going to know when I get in that country where the regular international airport is. I'm going to know where the private airports, what are called FBOs, are. I'm going to know, where trauma level 1 hospitals are, where police stations are, where military bases are, where fire stations are. I'm going to know where the key venues, like if they're doing a concert, where the arena that they're going to play at, or stadium is going to play at. I'm going to know all these different points. I'm going to have safe havens and contacts, and I'm going to know how to get into the country via air, which will be obvious. And if it's not a landlocked country, we'll look at sea options for getting out. We'll look at ground options. So, all that kind of stuff in the planning and organizing and structure happens on the front end. And then we move into the implementation of that plan. And that's where my guys, my team, my local national guys are really critical. And you and I discussed before, separate from this, like Poland and Spodek Arena, and, being able to go there with guys that I know. I might know 30 guys in Poland, and I'm going to utilize them, call them, and they're going to tell me what's real versus what I see on the news. And I may use resources like the State Department to assist. So we then implement that. And then the thing that's different, that kind of deviates from time to time for us, for operations, is the client. So a client who is an executive is very different than a client who's a celebrity. So an executive is organized, is structured, has a specific task that they're looking to achieve. And a celebrity is much more They're there to have fun and do their thing, and they're not as focused, and they have, a bubble that's not so realistic. And they have a team of people around them that help them achieve what it is that they want to achieve, which might not be a realistic goal. So those are very different things. And in that case, the celebrity, a personality profile is a huge thing to have on them, and understanding what motivates them to make decisions or what will stop them from making a decision. Those are critical components of what I do.
How long is your typical assignment?
If I just threw a number out there random, I'd say 2 to 3 months is an average tour, or 3 to 6 months is an average film, of which, half of it's shot on location.
So how much preparation work goes into that outside of that time?
Usually months. So what typically happens is, if you get a general time frame where you're going to do something, and you get a general location where you're going to do it from, you start researching right away. I start pulling data. I start looking at crime stats and trends. I start looking at when holidays are. I start looking at, what religion people are predominantly. I start looking at what currency they use, what language they speak, how the people dress, how they move, how they socially interact. You may be in one culture like jiu-jitsu, where I can be up on your face. I'm comfortable because I was just rolling on you and sweating on you and bleeding on you. But you go to another culture where, the standard is to be 8 feet away or 10 feet away when you're talking to somebody. And you really don't want to violate that. And I also don't want to be backing up on a culture that is used to being in close proximity. So it works both ways. So just studying those components, building a general plan, and then figuring out what the demographic is for that client, what activities that client's going to do when they're not doing their primary task, and starting to build options. So if we're going to go to Mexico City, and I know the client likes high-end dinners, I start to research, what are the Michelin-rated restaurants in Mexico City? Where are they located? If I have to choose between them and the client's going to go, where do I recommend? Which one? Well, based on location, I'm going to recommend this one. So I'm going to tell the client, hey, this one had the best reviews. It's in the safest area. Oh, by the way, I know how they're motivated. So I say, oh, all these other celebrities went to this location because they want to go where all the other celebrities went. And so that, again, comes back to the psychological profile. So I know that, and I couple it with the security. And that's a huge chunk of what my job is.
I mean, talk about moving target. Lord, I mean, we talked about jiu-jitsu being jiu-jitsu, but like I'm listening to you and my head is spinning. Like my OCD would... I would
handle this now.
So
that's why you do this, not me. But
but to your point, you make a great point, because in my realm, you're a white belt. But imagine if a person off the street came in and watched you go through jiu-jitsu, and you have these movements that you're executing flawlessly and smoothly, and you wouldn't have the expectation that that person would be able to do it. And so the only reason that you feel that way or you make that statement is just because you haven't been doing it or you haven't had access to it. It is in many ways like jiu-jitsu, because there are a lot of variables in an equation, and you're working to either get a very specific outcome or the opposite. Anything can happen but one particular outcome. And so jiu-jitsu is very much the same way. When I'm going on the offense and I'm attacking, let's say I pick 3 submissions that I get from, position X, knee and belly, and I'm going to go for a cross collar, an arm bar, or I'm going to do some type of variation of spinning to a knee bar, whatever. I have these 3 moves that I can move between actively. But when I'm defending, I say the only thing that can't happen is they can't get my arm or my neck or my leg, whatever. So it's everything but that. And security is very, very similar to jiu-jitsu.
And when there was one more thing that you didn't mention, and I know that it's very applicable in jiu-jitsu. I'm curious if that translates into security and what you do, and that's experience in past events, right? So in jiu-jitsu particularly, we experience things and we create this library of things that has occurred to us, and like, well, there's an opening, or yeah, no, maybe I'm not going to do this time because that fired back last time. Is that similar for you in your profession?
That's identical, because one is you can learn a theory. I can tell you a theory, just like jiu-jitsu. Hey, here's how it works. But then you get someone that doesn't let you do the thing, or you get a non-permissive environment where you can't do that thing openly, and you need to adjust or change course for that. And also, every time I go to that country, I'm taking notes on what happened, how it happened, and what the people responded to and what they didn't respond to. And so I start to build that plan in my head So you know that, obviously you have neurons in your brain, and if you want to create that pathway, that synapse, you have to have an experience typically. And so you have that experience, and now you're storing that synapse, and now I have that recall. Hey, when I go to Mexico City, through trial and error, I've learned don't go to that place on this day of the week. You can go during the week, but don't go there on the weekend. Because if you go there on the weekend after 10 o'clock at night, you're going to be stuck in this traffic. It's a slow moving roll down this major thoroughfare called Masaryk. Okay, cool. I know I can't go there on a weekend after 10 o'clock. I'm going to get jammed up in traffic and there's no way out. And I don't want to be, just like jiu-jitsu, I don't want to be a static target for somebody. In security, I want to be moving. I want to make it hard. I want to change angles. I want to change paces or vary kind of where I'm going to and from.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's a big part of what we do, and I'm kind of very interested here to hear what you actually saying, that this is such a almost one-to-one correlation between what we do on the mat and the experiences that you have in your
one of the guys that you interviewed, Henry Akins, was my old roommate when I was training at Hickson's, and Henry's come out to 3 or 4 courses, and the first course that Henry did, Henry goes, dude, that's exactly like jiu-jitsu. And then we do another block of training. He goes, oh my God, this is just like jiu-jitsu. And so it was very easy, and he was motivated to train and come back and take more and more courses because it was so similar to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and that's it. Do you think that's some of the reasoning why a lot of jiu-jitsu guys get involved in combat training, and a lot of them are involved in self-defense things, and even
I think it's a small part. I don't think it's a major part. I think a small part, because like jiu-jitsu guys tend to think that security is about the ability to fight, and it's actually the antithesis of that. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm fighting somebody, who's watching my principle, right? Fighting will cost you money one way or another. So if they take my principle because I'm fighting the decoy guy they sent me, I lost my principle. Or I beat the hell out of this guy, who are they going to sue? It's not me, because I don't have any money to take. It's my principal, the client. And so I just actually did a disservice to my client by doing that. So there's that component of it. But then there's the other component, which is like ego-driven or testosterone-driven. Most of us are in jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. And even if we weren't, if we were at a moderate level, jiu-jitsu's increased our testosterone and increased our ego. And therefore, we're typically drawn to more things like firearms training or protective security, shooting or driving or communicating or, living off the land. Those things, I think, have some type of corollary value.
Would you say the security is with that thought? Would you say the security is mostly about avoiding those confrontations versus actually having or managing them?
Yes. Yeah, because when you don't have the confrontation, you win 100% of the time.
Right.
And just like jiu-jitsu or MMA, eventually with enough exposures, I'm going to lose no matter how well trained I am, right? No matter what I know, no matter how smart I am, no matter how good my team is, I'm going to eventually lose. And so when you play the odds, you should play in favor of what's safe if you're being hired to protect somebody or something or an event. And that is to not engage in the fight in the first place. So we talk about this in the book, and we train a lot of private citizens on this as of last year. But for us, it's a very simple rule. I try not to go where problems happen, right? That's the first thing. If I don't go where problems happen, I'm probably not going to find a problem. Mm-hmm. If I'm working in the worst neighborhood in Chicago, I would fill up my gas tank before I go there, right? I wouldn't fill up there while I'm in the neighborhood, especially if I work nights. And all of a sudden I get off at night and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I go to the closest gas station to my work, and it's in a poor neighborhood that happens to have a lot of crime. That doesn't make sense. So I don't go to places that have problems. That requires a little bit of forethought and research. So I figure out first, where are the problems? And then I figure out how to not go there. It's by doing those same things I need to do in another environment at another time. So instead I go to the gas station that's, 30 miles outside of town, close to my house, and I go at 8 o'clock in the morning instead, and I'm good. But it requires forethought and knowledge. Then the next step is pretty critical. And this is the same as jiu-jitsu. If I see a problem unfolding, instead of taking out my iPhone and recording the problem, I leave. So at the first sign, this guy gets his hand in your collar, that's a problem. Not only is he going to have control of you, but when he gets something else in, either over or under or around or a Bravo or whatever, now you're getting choked. And it didn't come out of nowhere, which is what people tend to say. Like, it came out of nowhere. Like, no, it didn't. The guy telegraphed. We all telegraph it, even really good guys. And Hickson in particular, he telegraphed all his movements. There was just nothing I could do ever because he was perfect at doing that. So, first thing, don't go where the problem. 2, leave as soon as the problem starts. And then 3, learn how to barricade, to defend, and then fight back. And we do the same thing in jiu-jitsu. How do I start to defend that attack? How do I take it away so I can survive a little bit longer and reposition and shove a wedge between us so that you can't get that little extra half inch or quarter inch that you need to submit me, right? And so we go along those lines typically with all of our training and our thought process.
I mean, this is so simple and yet mind-blowing.
I literally had the gas station conversation with my wife last weekend. she works
for you.
Well, she works in there, and she's smart about it too, most things. She was running a little late. Our dog was sick. She's taking the dog to work with her. She works in that industry. And I forgot to get gas the night before, right? We live in the suburbs. Go get gas now. I'll get it on my way home. No, go get it now. You have time. I don't want you at 9:00 at night getting gas in the city. And don't get me wrong, I love that city, but getting gas in the city at night with potentially the dog in the car, right? These are all these opportunities that people see. I was like, just go now, just go, and she texted me 10 minutes later. She was like, I got gas. I'm on my way. I was just,
Nice.
And what you said about the phone too. So many people get out, and I'm keying on the gas station thing, but they get out, they start pumping their gas, and then they start looking at their phone. And it's just
yes,
like, man,
zero situational awareness, no idea what's happening in their environment, because their eyes are number 1 for detection methods and their ears are number 2. And now they've lost their eyes and most of their ears to this telephone that's not going to help them when an emergency unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to leap back to this because it is mind-blowing how many times this conversation takes place between students and instructors. How do I escape from blah, 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 blah position? And I remember, I'm going to take this back about a decade or 15 years ago, and I was asking the same questions. Yes, believe it or not, I was asking the same questions, and my instructor was telling me, don't be stupid, don't get caught in it. And I was like, well, thanks, genius. I mean, that doesn't help me. But now, decades later, I literally say the same thing to my students because, and wow, that's.
But I'm hard-headed, yeah. But sometimes,
sometimes there's no hope. Okay, just, but this is so fundamental and so important, right? And when instructors say this or your peers say that, they don't mean you're stupid, you made a mistake. It is more of a proactive approach of assessing the situation. And if you can avoid this conflict, this friction way ahead of time, then your escape already took place. It's done. You're not dealing with that situation.
100%. And we all have that same bit of advice that we've received, and now we're giving it. And the first time I was taught that, well, just don't put yourself in that spot. It sounds stupid, but here's the thing. Common sense is actually not common. Right. And so we can say something that but it doesn't mean just because you know it, you can apply it. Right. And this is where I have a book full of common sense material, right? It's all common sense stuff. The problem is we need to be reminded. And I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday who was a colonel in the Marines, and we're training jiu-jitsu. And I'm giving him back the same principles that he learned in the Marine Corps. I know he knows it already. I'm just reminding him so that he can apply it, because it doesn't matter what we know. And it doesn't matter if it's common sense if we're not applying the common sense. And so what Gary told his wife very well could have saved her life. Literally, it seems like a small, minor thing. What's the difference what time or where they get gas? It's a critical thing, especially in today's age, right? So it's a big deal, and people have gotten away from it, and we forget to make choices that are common sense based. We just do what's easiest.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, this is all nice and dandy and rainbows and beautifuls and you talk about professional. Gary doesn't get it, but and obviously you have 1, decades of experience, 2, endless resources. There is a financial backing behind this, and you are working with people who have special access. You said it yourself. Average Joe Schmo doesn't have access to any of this, period. How can they protect themselves? What should they be thinking about? What should be a train of thought when, Joe and Bobby go to, or whatever, husband and wife go to a restaurant. What should they be aware of besides the fact, well, we go to restaurants at night, don't we? I mean,
yeah, that's a great question. It's what can I do now? I don't have the money to buy a guy like you. What or hire? What can I do? And that's a common question. And I typically start with the three things we talked about earlier, which is don't go where there are frequently problems, leave at the first sign of a problem, and 3, learn how to barricade or fight back, right? So if I carry a gun, learn how to shoot that gun under stress, learn how to shoot it in close quarters. If I train jiu-jitsu, learn how to do that jiu-jitsu with a gi, without a gi, learn how to add elbows and knees and headbutts. Don't try to fight your jiu-jitsu with berimbolo. Use the most simple possible technique that will finish the fight. And we can talk about that later. So those are the first 3 things I tell them. And then I get into detection, like early detection, right? We talk about this. There's a program called the Marine Corps Combat Hunter Program. And basically what this program is it was designed by a group of guys to help warfighters overseas to detect things early and be able to deal with it and what to look for. But the premise of it, the very first part of it, is something called baseline anomaly, right? So the first thing in any environment, this can be in jiu-jitsu, this can be in a restaurant, this can be, in your neighborhood or at a mall, is to first establish what the baseline is. What's normal in a given environment, right? I'm trying to figure out who's there, how do they move, what are the lighting conditions, what are the walkways or paths, how do people act and behave normally in this particular environment? And the main reason, or the sole reason really, to know what's normal in this case is to be able to identify the anomalies. So what doesn't fit? So I know that guys normally don't dress like that, or they don't walk like that, or they don't talk like that, or they're not in that proximity to a person where the lighting conditions aren't normally that. I can say that's an anomaly. And is that anomaly either benign, meaning it just happens to be an anomaly, but it's not something that's going to hurt me? Or is it critical, something that can do me or my family or my business or whatever harm? So once I determine that anomaly that I've identified is critical and not benign, and the Marine Corps goes by what they call clusters of 3. So if I have 3 anomalies, I have to make a decision. The algorithm is called B plus A equals D, or the BAD algorithm. Baseline plus anomaly equals decision. When I have to make a decision, it comes down for us in the civilian world, not the Marine Corps, to 3 things. I either continue as planned, meaning that I think I have the capabilities, the skills, the assets to keep going and have that problem and solve it. And it's to my benefit to keep moving forward. Or I go to 2 and I just change behavior. So I'm walking down the street. I see something that's an anomaly. I cut across one street. I go up a block, over another block, back across. And I change my behavior. I change my route. I change my pattern so that I don't end up next to that anomaly. And then 3 is I abort. Basically, I cancel. So it's continue, change, or cancel. So at that point, I'm just jumping in my car and going home. I think it's too dangerous for me to handle. I don't even want to try to circumvent it in any sort of way. I just call it quits and I'll come back another time. And so baseline anomaly, I think for the average person is easy to understand. And I think it's really easy to implement too. What's normal in my environment? What's not normal? If it's not normal, is it just something that happens to be not normal? Or is it something that can hurt me? And then what should I do? What decision do I need to make based on that? Am I going to stay here and do the thing? Am I going to change, move around where I'm at to get a different vantage or arrive in a different way? Or am I just going to pack it up and go home?
I mean, you talk about something that's extremely basic. I mean, this is essentially the fundamentals of our existence, I would even say. I mean, we walk into the room and we look at pictures, who's here, this person is that, this, oh, here's food, here's a, whatever, here's a presentation, here's the show, but yet we ignore the things that really could trigger some of those important events that could take an impact on us, right? So why do we focus on some things and we don't focus on things that are important? Because that's what I think that's what it boils down to, right? I mean, nobody's going to say I walked into a restaurant and I didn't notice the beautiful artwork that's on the, or this waterfall, or this fountain, or this smell that comes out here, or this noise because music is playing, but yet we ignore all the other things.
Yeah, we tend to do 2 things. One is our focus generally speaking, when it comes to safety or security or protection, it's on the wrong thing. I'm looking at the wrong things. I'm thinking about the wrong things. If I'm looking at my phone, I'm looking at the wrong thing. If I'm looking at, the beautiful woman in the corner, I'm looking at the wrong thing. It's a distraction. If I'm looking at, what the food that they're serving is in the restaurant, I'm looking at the wrong thing. And so that happens with us because we become distracted. And you use the word focus 3 or 4 times in that last statement. And the thing is, we've lost where our focus should be, right? And that's a big, big deal. And this is exactly like jiu-jitsu. If I'm focused on the wrong spot, I'm getting hit, right? Because you notice when you do something, I hope, as a black belt, it's not a singular movement. Like I'm basically attacking your legs because I'm about to attack your throat, or I'm attacking your throat because I'm about to attack your leg. I put your energy where I want it by starting to fiddle with that area, grab things in that area. It doesn't have to be a move. It's just a distraction technique so that you free me up. Because if I know my training partner's mind's in that area, they can't protect something else, another area at the same time. They're going to be behind the power curve. So there's action and reaction. And I want them to be reacting because it's slower. And they have to have a moment of recognition where they recognize something's going on. And then they have to have a moment of action where they do something to change what's going on. And so we do this in jiu-jitsu all the time, constantly. So I want to be able to manipulate the moment of recognition and the moment of action if I can. But really what I'm trying to do is reduce the time between the moment I recognize a problem and the moment I'm able to act. And then my options for action. The more options I have, generally speaking, it's better for me. Okay.
And this is something I personally didn't understood until years, decades into jiu-jitsu. I think that what you talk about is action and reaction and making decision process and eliminating these decision points along the way in jiu-jitsu particularly. I don't think this hit me until I was a brown or even black belt. Like, I don't know, but this is recent. This is very recent. And that's something I really encourage my students particularly to use things like jiu-jitsu education. I'm not talking about come to class. Educate yourself. Study. Understand. What do I often say? Understand why.
The why? No, the
why things happen, right? Because this is where we can smooth out the process. Some call this a brain map or, reaction or muscle memory. There are plenty of different names, but this is all leading towards the same thing, making decisions very quickly and very, based on the triggers that occurred right in front of us, right? It's very much quicker. We don't analyze the whole Am I on the right track here?
No, you're on the absolute right track. But this, to your point, I agree with you. Somewhere around the middle of purple belt to kind of the beginning of black belt, people kind of figured this out, right? As you articulated. One of the big things is when we learn jiu-jitsu, the first thing is we have to learn, which is why we're sitting there and the instructor's talking and showing things. So in order for you to know where the problems can come from, what the problems can be, someone has to tell you or show you. You have to have some exposure to that first. And a lot of people think that it's innate in them, just like guys do with fighting. Like, oh, I'm a guy, I can fight. Well, if you're not practicing and training, you're not able to fight. It's that simple. And so this is the same. First, I have to learn strategically. I have to learn where the problems can come from, what they can be, and typically how they present themselves, which is identical to jiu-jitsu. Then once I understand that, then what I do is I start training, and I don't start training at 100 miles an hour. I start training slow, technically, and I start analyzing like you're encouraging them to do. Why is this happening? Why does it work? And why doesn't it work?
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that I cannot start jiu-jitsu today and go 100% balls out, just fight?
Ironically, I have been to a few schools that do that, and their injuries are higher and their growth is lower. But we all want to do that as men, don't we? I can't speak to the women are a little smarter when it comes to that stuff. We want to get in there and mix it up. But the reality is to be good at something, you have to understand it. You have to understand the inner workings. And so, yes, to your point, we all want to get in there and mix it up, but slow it down, figure it out, understand it, and break it down. And then apply it slowly with limited resistance, then with a little more resistance, then with a lot of resistance, then start to pick it up in terms of speed. I think you probably would do the same thing I would do. When I learn a new technique and I like it and I see that it's something I can incorporate into my game and I'm going to now try to incorporate it into my game, I start with a white belt who's lighter than me, and I apply it to them in sparring. And then I go with a white belt who's my weight. And then I go with a white belt who's heavier than me. I don't even try it on anybody else. Then I go to blue, lighter, my weight, heavier. If I achieve success with that, or when I achieve success with that, if I develop it, now I move on. But I'm not going to a black belt who's heavier than me, who's a world champion or Pan Am champion. And now I'm trying to do this brand new move that I don't really know very well, right? And that's how training works for us too. We take them in the classroom. We show them all the things that can happen. We show them the processes and theories to deal with it. We tell them about real world examples of how this thing unfolded, how it went, what went right, what went wrong. Then we go out in the field and we start to practice it really slowly. And then we practice it faster. And then we dump stress on them. In the stress inoculation phase, then it's solidified. All the lesson learned, like, holy shit, I just realized what happened. Oh my God, I did this and I did that. And when I was practicing, I didn't do any of that, but I didn't manage stress when I was practicing. So now you have to pressure test your moves, just like jiu-jitsu. So I see a ton of correlations there between what you're saying and what we're doing in protection and what we're doing in jiu-jitsu.
Well, and there's one more component of all of this, and that is our partner or opponent or the other side, whoever we are dealing with. And particularly, I think what's interesting is that everybody is different. So you, Todd, think very differently than I do from your experience as just as a human. Gary will do the same. Sure. It was completely different. And me dealing with each of you separately needs to be different. It cannot, well, I guess, let me ask you, should it be the same, or should we analyze this very differently?
No, it shouldn't be the same, because let's just talk about something that's very easy to understand. I can explain it in depth. People will fall asleep. But let's just explain it in simple terms. You're either taller or shorter than me. So you either have longer limbs or shorter limbs, and you can be very tall or very short. That changes where we get access to something with our hands, with our reach, with our limbs, whatever it may be. Also, you are either thicker than I am or you are thinner than I am. That changes how my arm fits around your neck. That changes how much resistance you can create with your size. So you can have 400-pound guy and you can have a 75-pound girl. You cannot assume it's the same. The other factor that's huge when you talk about protection or you talk about jiu-jitsu, the mindset. Let's say you are super passive. You're thinking about everything in terms of just safeguarding yourself, and you're very defensive. And let's say, I'm a super high testosterone guy, and everything is about attacking for me. So when it's explained and when it's done are very different things. So your limb length, your thickness, your mindset, all those things will affect what is most likely to work for you well. So we know all the jiu-jitsu moves work, and they can work for anybody, but some things work really well for certain body types or certain mindsets, while other things don't. And so when we have a guy on a team, we want them to have the same basic thinking, right? The same core fundamental thinking. So I teach all the guys the systems, the processes, the concepts, and give them all the same case studies. But they're not all equally valuable to me in every environment, because each guy brings something different. Each guy, let's say I need to speak Polish. Well, guess what, buddy? I don't speak Polish. If I have a guy on my team that speaks it, great. Let's say, you are a really good observer in people's, movements and activities and proximity, and I'm not. I need a guy like that on my team. So people will see things different way and they'll apply things different ways. The core fundamentals need to be the same, but it brings value to a team to have people that have other strengths that you don't have. And that doesn't, for my team, I want that.
That doesn't even talk about experience level either. That's
a whole other level.
Yeah.
Yes. This is just touching the surface.
And let's just make it clear here. Being taller or shorter is not a good or bad thing. It's different. Right?
It's a different game.
I think this is one of the most misunderstood parts of jiu-jitsu particularly, or any type of grappling or engagement. Just because you're tall does not mean that it's good for you. Just because you're short and little does not mean that this is bad. If you are a 90-pound female, it does not mean that it sucks. Maybe it sucks, but you can find spaces that 250-pound guy will never find. You have advantages that others don't. And I think this is one of the most underestimated parts for a lot of people to really sponge and see.
Well, I think we had Cole Miller on, and he was talking. We always ask, or we don't always ask, but it comes up a lot, is jiu-jitsu for everyone? And Cole said it's not for everyone, but it is for every body type. And I think people need to understand that if you are 5'2" and, you know, not in the best shape, you can still do jujitsu. You know, you'll just do it differently than the guy who is 6'3", you know, and is a volleyball player. It's just going to be different. So do it.
Oh yeah. I recall Gary, you know, my very first jiu-jitsu experience. I had privilege with, you know, I was thrown into a Shark Tank with Miguel Torres. I mean, he was getting ready for one of his professional fights. And, you know, I'm like twice of his size. And
how'd that work out?
Past the first 5 seconds, I don't even know what happened. Like, I mean, the guy destroyed me. And it is such an interesting dynamic. But yet, why does everybody think that being taller and longer and heavier is a better thing? It's just the visual, I guess. I don't know.
I would hope you're speaking more to the earlier levels of that. I really do think you can see enough examples in the jiu-jitsu community, you know, whether you're talking about shorter, stockier person like a Marcelo Garcia or a longer person like Rafael Lovato. Like there's very different bodies. You talk about a Cabrinha being a small, thin person. Like you have varying degrees, and you see, you know, generally speaking, heavier guys win the open, but occasionally that's not true, where you have these small guys come in and strategically dismantle them, you know, using a really solid strategy. Yeah. But absolutely, I think along the way, you learn that there are pros and cons to both, right? There are a lot of pros and cons. I was working with a guy a couple of weeks ago who's very long. He has crazy long arms. Like his hands go down to the bottom of his knees when he's standing upright. And we were working on grips and keeping me at bay outside. And after I worked him on a few things from stand-up, he was killing me there. And then when we went to the ground, we were working defenses because he had, again, the idea that he could keep me at bay on the ground, but he was giving up arm bars. And so we worked on how to shorten the limb length. And then the same thing we were doing with rear naked chokes, right? Because he couldn't do like a snowball grip, a gable grip and push the head in. He'd have to suck in, and he couldn't even come here. He'd have to come back behind his head to actually get it because his arms are so long and he had to take up additional space. So I think anybody that sticks around long enough, they get to have these same lessons. I think most of us, not all of us, but most of us come to the same conclusions when we're in jiu-jitsu long enough.
Isn't that beautiful that as evolving jiu-jitsu is, and I think it's extremely evolving, like it I think is one of the most evolving sports that there is out there. Like within the last 10 years, jiu-jitsu has changed so much, right? But yet the principle, the fundamental principles are almost the same.
And that's also why everything comes back to the fundamentals, whether you're shooting or you're driving or you're planning or you're doing jiu-jitsu. Everything is based on a strong foundation. No one would build their house on a foundation that was moving or shifting constantly, right? Unless you're in Mexico City and you're building on rollers or something like that. But the bottom line is foundations have to be solid. That's what foundations are for. And everything is built on those foundations. So that's the most solid point in your game is foundational.
How do you relate jiu-jitsu in your professional life? Do you have anything specific that you take literally from the mat and bleed it right into your security business and utilize to protect people?
No, I'm not a believer that one size fits all. And so, you know, if you're asking me about like, oh, well, how do you apply this berimbolo or inverted guard in a protective capacity? I would ask you to leave. So, you know, it doesn't translate. So one of the things I just talked about yesterday, or maybe it was early this morning, was things that work for us in jiu-jitsu are not always the best choices. It might be the easiest thing to get to, but for protection or for the military or for law enforcement, it's not what we want. So if I'm dealing with somebody in particular who's on a severe drug or like bath salts, and I break their arm with an arm lock, that doesn't stop the fight.
Nothing. Yeah.
It doesn't stop them from accessing their weapon. It doesn't stop them from accessing my weapon. It's a problem for me. And also now I've just created this major mess, whether I hyperextended or I broke it as a compound fracture. I've made a mess of that person when I could have done something that would have solved the problem, one, and two, been more humane, like a rear naked choke. And if I apply it properly, which is how we're trained to do it, that person's heart rate drops, their blood pressure drops. And at the end of it, when they wake up, either I'm gone if I'm in protective services, or if I'm in the military, they're in flex cuffs, or if I'm in law enforcement, they're in cuffs. And now I deal with the problem in a much more humane way. They don't have any long-term injuries at all. They probably calm down a little bit, although that doesn't always happen. So my selection is based on the outcome, and it's also based on my environment, what's right for that environment. So the big thing for me, and I've said this a lot, and guys get defensive when I say this, we train on soft mats. We never train on asphalt or concrete or rocks. And when I say we, I don't mean me, because I train on asphalt, I train on concrete, rocks, I train on sand, I train on everything that I'm going to be around, because I want to see what works in those environments, right? And so when we train on mats, we're discounting surface space of where fights really happen. Another thing that we do frequently, right, is when we're on the ground, we tend to be fixated downward if we're in the mount, or we're fixated upward if we're in the guard. So we don't have the ability to scan or see what's going on around us. And we basically lose the ability to see if people are coming to hurt us, friends or other people of the individual that's attacking us. And that's bad, because we lose part of our senses. We get tunnel vision ultimately. That's not good for us. We do that in the mat room all the time. Another thing, when you're fighting, you really want elevation. You want to be over something. You don't really want to be down and have that thing above you, because they can access certain things, in particular weapons. But they can also see things coming. They can also do other things like be mobile. That's one thing we lose in jiu-jitsu, because when we lock into certain spots, it could be anything. It could be guard. It could be half guard top, half guard bottom. It could be cross side. We're not mobile. We're stuck in a position. It's going to take us half a second to get out. So coming back to your question, when I realize all these things in real world type training scenarios and real world events, I try to make my training as simple as possible, number one, so that I can replicate it when I have an adrenaline dump. So all of a sudden, bam, I have an adrenal response. I start to get auditory exclusion. I start to get tunnel vision. All the blood pulls away from my limbs. I lose my fine motor skills, and everything's pooling in my chest. I can still do the movement, and I can still think the way I need to think to execute that movement. So I train that way. So I'm training against a car. I'm training in a car. I'm training under a car. I'm training against a wall. I'm training in the sand, in the dirt. And if you looked at my Instagram page, you would find some videos of that. And probably a week ago, another one of the guys, it's a big firearms guy, Kerry Trainer, who's actually in the Chicago area. He actually posted some stuff up. We were training against cars and in sand and on rocks and all this other stuff. And it changes it. I don't want to do any type of sacrifice throw on rocks or concrete or asphalt. And I don't want to leave my arms underneath that stuff. It's not good for me. So it's not the fundamentals that we change. It's just how we're applying the fundamentals when you talk about protection, military, or law enforcement.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talk about essentially rules of engagement, right? It in a sense, or environment that we are surrounded.
Yeah. So
by,
ROE
right?
is for military, and then in law enforcement, they would call the same general concept use of force. So rules of engagement for the military, use of force for law enforcement.
And that's fully applicable with what you talk about, and then in jiu-jitsu too, right? Because if you're talking about jiu-jitsu as a self-defense, again, we're not going to bear and bowl somebody to protect ourselves. Right. Well, one can try, but I'm curious of the result.
I don't care what the guys are doing, but I'm not going to.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you can try. I'm curious of the result, right? But my train of thought is going to be simple, right? Protect myself, control the situation, and get out of there. I mean, that's as simple as that. However, if we are in a tournament, I mean, Pan Ams are taking place this weekend, or they just wrapped up, right? I mean, that's going to be very different. Very different. Bear and borrow might be one of the most powerful things that you might be doing, because there's a weakness of your opponent, and it allows you to score points and so on and achieve the goal that you desire. But we're talking about very different environments. And
what are you training for is really the question.
What's
what are
your goal?
You training for? Yeah. I agree. Listen, if somebody grabs me or starts to push on my chest, I can arm drag them, right? If I practice an arm drag 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times, as soon as somebody does that and I'm under stress, I'm going to do that thing. That's the muscle memory. I'm not thinking, I'm just doing. And at a really high level, I can think and do both, right? But let's say the solution instead of that would be easier, just punch him in the face. You're fully capable of punching him in the face, and that's a better solution, maybe. But you're not going to do that because you didn't train that. And so you're not gonna, I think guys that don't understand this, and this is a lot of guys, especially in the tournament world, think that they're just going to produce these results in different conditions, right? I can go train in rocks and I can train in sand and against cars and all of that, but that's not going to help me for Pan Ams. It's really not. It can help my mind conditioning, and that's where it stops. So I think, again, what's your goal in terms of outcome, and what environments do you live in? Do you operate in? Do you move around in? I've done 4 jiu-jitsu tournaments in the past maybe 8 weeks, and won 3 and took second in 1. It's not because you can't apply the way that I'm training to it, because I stick to the basic core fundamental movements. When I'm doing tournament jiu-jitsu, I'm still doing fundamental, simple stuff. When you have more problems or more movements, you have more potential points of failure, right? And so when we do these complex things, they're cool. And sometimes they trick the guy because they're so complex. You got a guy in Chicago there where you're at named Shoney Carter, who I went against back in the day.
We know
Shoney.
Everybody knows Shoney.
Shoney's whole system, his whole style was being asymmetric and just, it's awkward to deal with for a lot of guys. So the guys that weren't really solid on their fundamentals would have a hard time with him, whereas guys that were really good at fundamentals would finish quickly. So it's just a very different approach. I don't think, and I'm not saying, and I think people don't hear me when I'm saying this, I'm not saying that if you do tournament jiu-jitsu, you can't be a street fighter and you can't protect yourself. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you want to be more efficient and more effective at fighting in the street, you need to train those variables into it. Just like a guy on the street who is in the military or who's in law enforcement or who's in protective services, he needs to train for a competition. If he wants to win a Pan Ams or a Worlds or a Nationals or a US Open, he better be training within the rule set that those guys are fighting in, on the mats, in the distances, with the times, with the belt levels that he's going to fight against.
Agree 100%. I mean, this is 1, goals are different. 2, environment is different. And 3 is the rules of engagement or how we are, what's the objective behind what we are trying to do. Those are, I think, 3 fundamental pillars that brings us to success. And this is not only jiu-jitsu. I'm talking about business, life, and everything that we do in our life. We really have to understand where we want to go, what the objective is, and who we are dealing with. Without that, our success goes significantly down, and then often we ask ourselves why we didn't succeed.
Yeah, and you just brought us full circle, because basically, again, jiu-jitsu as a metaphor for life, which is what you just talked about, coupled with the other thing we said, which is that jiu-jitsu conditions you to deal with the hardship, the obstacles, because even when you put into place the perfect technique and the perfect this and the perfect that, the angle changes on somebody, or the scenario changes with somebody, or your stress level changes. Or how about this? You are doing your jiu-jitsu. How many times have you rolled with your wife and kids coming into the mix, or people grabbing them while you're trying to deal with one guy and you're trying to deal with that? You're not training that way very often, if you are at all. And so you shouldn't expect the same outcome. So we figure out ways to do this with jiu-jitsu, how to deal with these adversities, and we overcome them. And just like in life, we're going to constantly have problems. How do you deal with those problems, those circumstances? Do you scan and assess and look for options and then try your best at 100%? Or do you just crumble and say, I'm going to go in a fetal position in the corner? And jiu-jitsu conditions you for all of those things.
Todd, before we wrap this up, or before we start wrapping this up, is there really any other way than getting in there and continuing training to get this adopted in our life? Because you're talking about a lot of hard things. I mean, these are hard. This is not easy. Let's not BS around here. We're talking about continuous evaluation. We're talking about struggles. You got to put yourself under pressure. You have to continuously drill. And we didn't even talk about this. All of this is a perishable skill. This will disappear if you do not continue doing it, right? So all of these things, right? How in the world do I become good at this? I mean...
Yeah. So to your point, one, you're spot on. I agree with you 100%. And I think most guys that have experience would agree with that, especially in jiu-jitsu. I think that you have to figure out how much time and energy you're willing to dedicate to whatever component it is, whether it's the protection of your family, the protection of your business, or yourself. Jiu-jitsu is a little bit different in that when I say I want to be physically fit, I can do jiu-jitsu. When I say I want self-defense, I can do jiu-jitsu. When I say I want camaraderie, I can do jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu kind of couples many different areas together. Whereas when you start talking about other stuff, it's less likely for that to occur. You need to find ways to blend it together. And so let's say you have some guys on your team that are firearms experts. Let's say you have some guys on your team that are driving experts. Trying to access that network and get that information and then practice that information with like-minded people or people that are willing to share high-level information with you, that's really important. And if your instructor is like focused on tournament jiu-jitsu, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. And he's probably the best person for you in tournament jiu-jitsu. But maybe you seek out somebody else either in the class or in another place, not necessarily another school, but is focused on protection style of fighting or defending, or creating layers, which is another thing we can talk about. But I think you got to seek it out, figure out how much time you can allot to it, and make it part of a routine, part of a habit. So I know I'm going to jiu-jitsu Monday through Friday, and then I'm doing either firearms, driving, or like real scenarios, meaning, walls and concrete and water and sand and whatever else on Saturdays. Like that's my dedicated day for that thing. I think that's the only way. Habit is absolutely essential for you to develop on all these different planes and platforms.
Yeah, and I agree. I actually had a recent conversation with somebody, and they were asking me, what do you do if you are unable to train, meaning, you are injured or you need to take a mandatory timeout out of your control, and it was such an interesting conversation because we came to the conclusion that no matter what, you still need to continue that habit. You still need to show up. Like, I get it, you can't train, but you being there enforces the strong habits that you have. So once you come out, your mind is sharp, you're ready to go. You just need to catch up on your physical aspect that maybe, perish a little bit during your time off. But longer you are off, longer you're off the mat, off the training, off the classroom, whatever it is, harder it will be to return. And, this is a separate conversation, but that could be one of the main reasons why people don't return and they have such a hard time, getting back into their old routines.
Absolutely.
That's you said something there. First of all, that's absolutely the case. If you come in, you don't have the same mental gap or lag that you would have if you didn't go in to watch things happen. That stays fresh in your mind. And watching a rep is very close to doing a rep. Your mind is actually doing that rep when you watch it, when you think about it. And it stays at the forefront of your mind. And as I get older, what I realize is, yes, I'm out for X amount of weeks for either an injury or for work. I have to physically get back in, but that's not the part that aggravates me the most. It's the mental lag. Like, I see it, but I'm slow in executing it. My timing's off or my strategy's poor or whatever. And that's more from not being in the realm, from being pulled out of the realm. So that's great advice for people to actually keep coming in. It's part of their routine. It's part of their habit, and they're seeing it and getting it. And when they do return, they're going to return closer to where they left. One thing that I wrote about in the book, and a few people have actually posted about this, is that when you quit at something, it becomes easier to quit the next time. Yes. So successively, it's going to happen. Each time it's going to be easier and easier to quit. And before long, you never even try again. That's it. And conversely, when you endure, when you struggle and you keep pushing, it becomes easier to resist each time until there's almost no resistance necessary. You win. And this is true in jiu-jitsu. This is true in life because it's about mental condition.
Yeah, and people like David Goggins talk about this very, very, very strongly and very, very openly. Mind is our number one obstacle. We can go past our physical limitations very often. What we think is the top ceiling, it really isn't. There is much more beyond that, but it all really takes the exploration. The curiosity to push yourself a little bit more than, where we think we can go. And I think jiu-jitsu is a very good example of it, especially when we find ourselves in these uncomfortable positions, right? What do they say? Jiu-jitsu is being comfortable and uncomfortable, essentially, right? Gary and I, we talked about this very, very, very often. Todd, listen, we've been at this for a while. Before we wrap this up, This is what happens when a good conversation takes place. We have this ending to kind of wrap it. Before we wrap this up, we have 5 questions for you. We didn't tell you about this. This is a little secret we do with every guest. But kind of rapid questions. Gary's going to take a lead on this. Some of them are funny, some of them are not. But it always generates interesting wrap up to the whole conversation. Gary, you
absolutely. Let's do this. But before we do, we've mentioned the book a couple times, and it's here. It's Protection for and from Humanity. I recommend it. It really teaches you a lot. Basically what we were talking about earlier, is that common sense stuff and the mindset. Take a look at it for sure. And we will have links to get it in the show notes. As far as the 5 questions, let's get started.
You feel pressure?
Hold on. Let me stretch out real quick.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Get your mind right. What was it like the first time you stepped on the mat? And I want to know specifically jiu-jitsu, really.
Okay, so the first time I stepped on the mat, when I was coming onto the mat, I had a lot of fighting experience in the real world and also in training. And I had never done jiu-jitsu. The only thing I'd seen was Royce Gracie doing jiu-jitsu in the UFC. And when I came on the very first time, I asked, which I now know how stupid this is, but I asked Rodrigo Vaghi, who was a black belt when I was a white belt on my first day, okay, are you ready to go to him? And he's like, buddy, not with me, with my guys.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the first mistake that I made, was asking a black belt if he was ready to go with me on my first day. And then when I got on the mat, the first person he put me with, almost like he knew what was going to happen, was the smallest dude, this guy named BJ, who trains to this day. BJ was 17. He was 150 pounds. And we tapped hands. And as we started rolling, BJ does some weird thing. I don't know what he's doing. I think I'm going to smash. And all of a sudden, I'm like, and he's triangle choking me. I tap. I'm like, man. And my first thought, in defense of like myself and my ego, it was the first thought, that was a fluke. He just did something and I went in the wrong way. And I just got caught, I got stuck in the door somehow. So we tapped hands, we went again. And, instead of going for 30 seconds, I lasted till 1 minute, and he same exact triangle choke on me. So that pretty much summarizes my first week or two or month or two of jiu-jitsu, but that was my very first jiu-jitsu experience. And after BJ got done beating my ass and embarrassing me and taking away my manhood, then I went around to everybody else in the class and they beat the shit out of me for that hour. So that was my first exposure to jiu-jitsu outside of watching Royce.
So pivoting off of that quickly, did that encourage you to get back into it, or was that a mental stop for you?
There was duality to it, because there was how I felt like I got crushed. And so I didn't want to come back and be crushed repeatedly, but I also knew on my logical side, I need to do this. I need to be able to do this. If these guys are doing that to me, imagine if I learn it, what I can do to people. And so that forced me to immediately keep coming back. I never took a break. Once that happened, I never took a break. But I'm not going to lie, like a lot of other guys I know, and say, that I didn't have it. I definitely had that feeling like, holy shit, I'm not going to walk through the door and show face again after taking that kind of ass. But here's the thing. What you know and what I know is that this happens to almost everybody, short of
Absolutely.
like Division I wrestlers. But it's a common occurrence and it's a common story. And again, like a lot of jiu-jitsu stories with guys that have done it a while, you see like, oh, that's my story. No, that's a variation of my story.
I love it. I think I already know the answer to this just based on what you were just talking about, but have you ever wanted to quit?
Have I wanted to? Yes. Yeah. There's a big difference for me, because I get the devil and the angel kind of concept on the shoulders, where it's like, you know what, it's not worth it. You're not going to get anything. And thankfully for me, lucky enough, the voice on the other side is like, nope, you can't quit. You can't do it. You're going to embarrass yourself. You need to do this. You need to do that. And the voices are still there in terms of, you should do this. You don't need to do that. Oh, you're almost 50 years old. Like, no excuse. Nope, I'm not hearing it. And so what I learned to do over time is to kind of quiet the voice that says to quit and just override it immediately with something positive. Like, nope, I've done this a million times. I'm going to do it again. I'm not quitting no matter what. So the real answer is yes, I've thought about it, but I always shut that voice down.
I even heard that longer you train, there is more reasons to quit. But yet we develop this, immune system, if you will, something that you talked about that, right? More closer you get to that quitting part, more resistance you have because you've done it so many times, and it's really it becomes a mental game. It's like, yeah, okay, I've been here. Just get over it. Just suck it up. Geez, Lord, and move on. Let's get back to it.
Yeah, you've been there a million times,
yeah.
right? Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to insert the question from the listener here. And that is from Joy. So Joy, thank you very much. But basically she's asking, what has been the hardest series of moves or movements that you had to master?
Oh, that's deep.
Yeah. I mean wow. Do I go back 25 years and
right.
All right. So let's simplify it. What is the most difficult thing in your, decades of being on the mat and then even professional, you can leap into that. What's the most difficult concept or series of motions that you had to master, that you had to become very efficient in?
Probably in my case, like I wanted to always establish a solid position. So I think transitions and links in the transitions are probably it. And consequently, my half guard got a lot better because that's always this transitional point, right? From top to bottom or bottom to top, like that's the middle ground. And so what I found is my mindset, even though the techniques could be identical, my mindset, like half guard top and half guard bottom, need to be different because I want a different objective or a different angle or whatever. So I think that has become the most complex component for me. Not difficult, but just complex in that I'm doing the same moves from a different position, just one on top, one on bottom. But the mindset needs to be very different in how I link those moves together, how I connect the moves to get the outcome that I want. And consequently, that's become, a great spot for me to be comfortable in, because it was challenging for me initially. And I had to figure out all the pieces to either side of the puzzle. And that's probably another thing that I wish I would have learned, or a process I would have learned when I started and I didn't. The Brazilian method for teaching frequently, and it's changing now with the Americans dumping stuff on it, but was like, we're teaching one thing one day, we're teaching another thing another day. And it's like, it's compartmentalized and it's not connected. And one of the things that I found is by training opposites with each other, I actually understood the full movement and the angles and the position and the pros and the cons of both of them better. I understood it in its totality versus just one component. So that's my brief answer. Is that was a challenge for me initially, but now it's become a strength for me.
Yeah. So first, you're talking about more of a concept-based teaching versus step-based teaching, right? Which is the new age, however you want to slice it. But I think it's brilliant the way to approach this. And more, this is what I often talk about. Understand why things happen. Don't necessarily memorize the moves, right? And life gets easy. It's harder in the beginning, but in long term, it's significantly easier. So yeah.
Yeah, we talk about connecting the dots a lot.
Connecting the dots,
that's
yeah.
super
yes.
important. That's a great way.
Yeah, I think I see growth. Like you say, it's harder in the beginning, and I agree that it might take a little longer, but I don't think it's harder. I think it's easier for the person to learn that way. It just takes longer.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's probably what you meant when you say that. So, when I'm teaching guys, I'm really working hard to show them the pros and the cons of this. Like, here's where you're going to have offense. Here's where they're going to create the defense. Here's how you take away the defense. Here's how you create the offense. And we're looking at opposing movements frequently together. When you get taken down, you got the takedown component and then you got the landing, and, there's my moment of opportunity. How do I couple those things? So in teaching, in proper teaching, not jiu-jitsu, they would call that chunking methodology,
yes.
where you're chunking the pieces together.
Yep. Yeah, which is very interesting, right? There's a lot of, and not to deviate again, but there's a lot of similarities between, actual education and teaching jiu-jitsu, which we're getting into a separate topic of, who is a good instructor, who isn't, and how jiu-jitsu should be taught, shouldn't be taught. So let's go to the next question, because I'm going to get deviated.
But sticking with that, and we won't go much further, but sticking with that, that's also relative to who the student is. Because some students learn better one way and others learn it better another way. And some students I know want to have the teacher spending 30 minutes explaining the technique because they're very auditory. Other ones are visual and they want it in a shorter period because they can see it. They don't have to hear all the words. And so you get timelines and you get kind of the method of learning that's best for them. And then other ones who look, just show it to me real quick because I'm 100% kinesthetic and I need to physically do it to really understand it.
Oh yeah, no.
And so I think that's another component.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I've
it.
experienced this from an instructor perspective. When you explain something to a larger group and then you come up to the student, he's like, I still don't get it. And then, a lot of instructors literally will scratch their head as like, damn it, I showed this 10 times. How you not getting it? But here's the interesting part. You take their hands-on approach, you put it where they need to be, and there's like a light bulb goes off. Oh, because it's a different style of learning, right? People really, this is where we're going back to the whole, we all different how we process information, and seeing, hearing, and then, comprehending as all three different components. So.
Yep. Good stuff. All right. Describe your feelings when you got your black belt.
For me, I had been run through the ringer, and I was probably, I think, like 12 years into the journey. And it was almost like, for me, it was a very important time to understand that I had the respect of my instructor, for him to bestow that upon me. And another thing I don't think people talk about a lot, or at least I don't hear it, is that I felt after the fact a major sense of responsibility, no matter where I went, whether I was teaching or training. So it meant something to me in terms of responsibility for rolling, for showing a technique, for what choices I made in the school, how I interacted with people. So I think, that was my takeaway from getting it. One is I was very grateful that my instructor thought I should be a black belt and recognize me as a black belt. And two, just the level of responsibility, the weight on my shoulders for having it.
That is awesome.
Awesome.
All right. And then lastly is, do you wash that belt?
I don't wash my black belt because I came up in a very, Brazilian community. Rodrigo's Brazilian. And so we weren't allowed to wash it because the concept, as you guys know, is that you wash away your experience. So we had to wash everything and be very clean about everything and hygienic, yet we have the nasty, dirty belts. And I probably should adapt to more modern times, but I don't wash.
Well, and a side note, I mean, we've done a survey, over the last 8 months or so with everybody, all the listeners and all the guests, and it's interesting numbers are coming back to us that a large majority of the guests, which would be the old school guys, do not wash their belt. However, majority of the listeners do. So there is some pivot point, I think, that's happening with that culture, right? Anyway, it is what
that's
it is.
probably a good thing. And the weird thing about it is I'm not superstitious at all.
Me neither.
But it's the culture that I was brought up in, and it's so ingrained in my head, even though it's not logical. It's absolutely not logical. You can't wash away experience like that. You know that. I know that. But it's such part of the culture that I came up in. I was indoctrinated. And so, I can't bring myself to throw my actual belt in the washer.
Oh no, I mean I remember endless stories when people came back to my instructors, and I started with Carson Gracie Sr. So to talk about old school, right? I mean, people came up to him and said, "I washed my belt and the stripes came off." He literally threw them off the mat. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, laughs aside, but it's such an interesting part of historical component of what jiu-jitsu really is and what we have in front of us today.
It's a tradition, and that tradition is unique to jiu-jitsu because I washed every other belt I had.
Well, that means you don't know much by now.
All right. Everything else is washed away. Sure.
Anyway, Todd, thanks for being here. Before we wrap this up officially, where can people find you? We'll post all the links in the description and all social media. Gary, show the book one more time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting read. I would suggest that you guys get this. It's some really cool information from a protection perspective. For one, but why don't you talk about it? You're the guy.
I'm going to just say that the book is a common sense field manual for people that are interested in protecting themselves or their families or their businesses, or just kind of learning basic common sense principles that you can utilize, much like jiu-jitsu. I see a ton of crossover between this and jiu-jitsu. I don't know if you know Josh from I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu. He just read the book and talked a lot about how many correlations there are between this book and actual jiu-jitsu. So I think your fan base, your demographic is perfect for this. I think they'll enjoy it and they'll see the value in it.
Yeah, and I like how simple the book is. There's really nothing complex about it. I really would recommend it. Take a peek at it.
Yeah, it's designed for anybody. I have friends that are giving it to their daughters going off to college. They're concepts. They're basic, simple concepts that apply across all spectrums. I didn't get into the weeds on this on purpose. It's meant to be for a broad spectrum or a broad demographic, not just tough, badass guys. It's not how it works. So finding me, if you want to check out who we take care of in terms of celebrities, that's posted. We don't post executives. We don't post dignitaries or governmental work. You can go to tourprotection.com, TOUR protection.com. That's my business site. You can also go to todafox.com if you want to check out pictures of me around the world at the pyramids in Giza or Machu Picchu, or you name it, on top of Kilimanjaro or whatever thing. And then the last one, which we just started not very long ago, is the Instagram account, which the Instagram account is @tourtraining. So those are the 3 points that you can find me. Book's easy to find. The book can be found on the website. The book can be found on Amazon. It can be found on Apple, Barnes & Noble. You can find it almost anywhere.
That's what I was about to ask. So good. Book accessible, major book platforms, and then obviously check out the links, and then, more to come. This was good.
Yeah, we had a good time. I'm glad we had all that trouble.
Enjoyed talking to you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it all came together nice.
Yeah, I feel like you should do more. I have more questions written down, but anyway.
Well, we'll do another one, I hope. If you had a good time, let's do it.
Seriously, I'd love to follow up with you guys. Let's do it.
All right,
we got a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. All right, Todd, thanks for the great conversation. Good luck with everything you're doing, and let's stay in touch, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.